This is Once Upon a Dream, written by Kraiva. Part 6 of Surrogate, the Director's Cut. The rating is mature. No archive warnings apply. The category is general. The fandom is Malevolent, the podcast.
Additional tags. This is a perfectly normal fanfic. Come closer. Wump. Angst and hurt comfort. Heavy angst. Arthur is extremely low. Brief attempt at self-harm. But it's thwarted. Don't worry. Voices by Lynn Larsh as John, Jasper as Arthur, Vampirism as the narrator and Faro, SSJTrinity, Kraiva, and Somniate as the work introduction. Editing by Flamia. Directed by Vampirism. Transcript by Saffron. Created and posted with permission from the authors of Surrogate, the Director's Cut.
When Faro has a nightmare, Nibbles makes sure her father is there to tell her it's okay.
Arthur, wake up!
He woke with a gasp and a surge upward, his heart pounding out of his chest.
John!
It's watching us.
Arthur was sure his numb left hand was clenched in a fist.
What? What is... John, I can't...
The goat.
What? Nibbles?
Yes, Arthur.
Arthur let out his held breath in a loud huff, letting his head thump back against the pillows.
For fuck's sake, John. I thought it was something serious.
You don't think that thing skulking in a corner to watch us sleep is serious?
John's voice was the dangerous growl that preceded an argument about Arthur's self-preservation skills.
After what happened?
Maybe it's keeping watch.
It was a good theory, or so he felt at any rate, given how just 3 weeks ago a god had attempted to peel him like an orange in a bid for her brother's attention.
Or...
He felt a gentle tug on the sleeve of his medical tunic.
Arthur, I didn't even see it move.
All right, that was spooky, Arthur was forced to agree. He sat up, stiffly, his torso still aching like a bruise, and colored like it, beneath his bandages.
It's a bit early, Nibbles.
He reached out a hand to pet the creature.
Arthur, don't pet it.
He did so anyway, his hand settling on the bark-like plates of the creature's head. It certainly felt goat-shaped, if not for the deep fissures between plates that Nibbles skillfully helped him avoid, bringing him instead to the velvety soft patch of flesh at the base of her ear. The creature let out a contented huff as Arthur scratched, before the head moved away from his touch and he felt another, more insistent tug at his sleeve.
What? What is it?
Arthur, you can't be serious. We just started walking again.
Nibbles? Why aren't you with Faro?
Another tug, and Arthur got to his feet as quickly as his mangled body would allow.
This could be a trick. Arthur!
She could be in danger.
Arthur was wobbling even as he limped forward. Every step on his right leg caused white-hot pain to crackle across his skin, but he carried on to the door regardless, throwing it open. Nibbles moved past him, sinuous and nearly silent, and Arthur paused as he realized 2 things. 1, he was fully exposed once again, alone in the hallways of the king's palace. 2, he had no idea where Faro's chambers were. A gentle tug at his hem, and he reached out, a laugh on his breath.
I suppose we're not alone this time. Right, Nibbles?
The creature moved, and Arthur's hand ghosted down her back, over cracks and what felt like fur or roots or bark or something, And then that something caught his hand. Nibbles began to move, and Arthur stumbled right behind her, the goatling moving just fast enough to keep him wincing with pain, but not out of breath. It tugged him around corners and down long, twisting hallways, and dread grew inside him as Arthur realized that they were heading towards the heart of the palace. He'd never been this far inward, at least not knowingly, certainly not on his own.
Arthur, I'm doing my best to keep track of all of these turns. It's a lot, though. All the hallways look the same.
When Nibbles began to slow, Arthur let out a pained gasp, putting his weight on his left leg for a single, merciful moment.
We'll figure it out.
He grimaced, lips tight against the pain.
Do you see her?
Arthur!
Nibbles surged into movement once again, and Arthur was pulled behind it, frantically stumbling as fast as his legs would go as the goatling broke into a trot.
What was...
It looked like Nibbles was, I don't know, sensing something. I told you not to do this.
John, where?
I don't know, Arthur.
Nibbles rounded a corner so fast that Arthur nearly flew off his feet, if not for an expert pivot of his numb left foot that kept him standing upright, barely.
Try!
I think we're getting near the center. Hallways are starting to change. Everything looks more regal, more lavish, more important. I think...
Just as suddenly as her trot began, Nibbles stopped, Arthur stumbling to a pained, wheezing stop a half step behind her. His chest burned, both inside his lungs and out across its entire surface. And with a pained wince, he wondered if he had ripped open the new scar tissue that was holding his skin on. And then he heard it. Arthur could remember how the very first encounter he had with the King in Yellow went. He was broken, bleeding, and had been thrown into the middle of a New England blizzard without warning. The cold had been so all-encompassing, so sharp, like he was being embalmed alive. As he heard the sniffles and gentle sobs from the room ahead, it was like that blizzard was being poured into his very soul. His mouth tried to form John's name, uselessly, the sounds refusing to come out in little more than a pained wheeze.
John!
The door is directly ahead. The handle is on your right, at about hip height. Are you...
Tears were welling in Arthur's eyes, and he nodded, silently walking to the door. When had Nibbles let go? He hadn't noticed. He couldn't focus on anything else. John wasted no time on description.
To your left, there's a canopy bed. The path is clear.
Arthur knelt at her bedside, mouth dry and full of cotton.
Furrow? Eddie! I'm here, baby.
Arthur reached out to touch her, desperately.
I want Daddy!
Her little toddler voice was so high and sad, and it was like Arthur had been stabbed with 1,000 shards of ice, and he wished that the monster who had mutilated him nearly a month ago had finished the fucking job.
Daddy.
Words failed him. And then John spoke.
Daddy is off traveling. But Uncle Arthur is here.
Uncle!
Arthur could feel tiny hands graze his face.
Arthur, I had...
It's okay. It's okay.
Arthur scooped Furrow into his arms.
I'm here, darling. I'm here. It's okay. It's all right.
She cried, burying her head in his chest, and Arthur began to sing.
Over in Killarney, many years ago,
My mother sang a song to me in tones so sweet and low, just a simple little ditty in her good old Irish way. And I'd give the world if she could sing that song to me this day. Tooralooraloorall, tooralooralai.
The chorus was simple, more feeling than words, and Arthur rocked Furrow as the girl's sobs softened into sniffles, and finally into the tiny shaking breaths of a child who had just finished crying. She pressed her little ear to his chest as he moved from singing to humming, her hands curled into his medical tunic. And they sat for what felt like a contented, silent millennia.
Uncle Arthur?
Her voice was so small and so soft and so fragile.
Yes, Furrow?
I don't want to go in the water.
And just like that, Arthur is in the blizzard again.
You don't have to go, baby.
His eyes are suddenly wide and empty. His left hand maneuvered just so, with incredible subtlety, and gave his right arm a squeeze so tight he could feel his nails digging in.
I won't let anyone do that.
Promise?
I promise.
He felt her nod against his chest, and Arthur must survive. But he can't. He can't do this.
Let's get her tucked in.
John offered, and Arthur was so thankful. She fussed a bit when he laid her in bed, but Arthur fluffed her pillows and hummed that refrain. And soon she had transitioned into the soft snores of a child sleeping peacefully. And he needed to leave this room now. The door closed behind him, and the moment Arthur heard the latch click, he began to cry.
Arthur!
Arthur began to walk back down the hallway. Just a bit further, far enough where he could make sure she can't hear. Far enough.
Arthur, please! Say something, please!
He felt no pain anymore. It was like his body had gone fully numb, like he'd gone into shock.
Arthur!
They rounded a corner, and as soon as Arthur was certain he was far enough away, he collapsed and wailed. This was not the cry of any thinking being. This was a cry of pure agony, of loss, of heartbreak distilled into a single horrific sound.
Arthur!
His left hand slid to his face, the grip desperate, frantic.
Arthur, she's all right. Arthur, she's alive. She's okay.
She remembers. She remembers how I...
No!
John's voice is commanding, booming, desperate.
I can't...
His fingers dug into the scar tissue that surrounded his chest, desperately trying to hurt, to suffer like he deserved.
John, I can't.
The hand on his face vanished, and Arthur could feel his fingers lacing together, the grip tight, resolute.
No. No, Arthur. I won't let you.
Arthur let his head drop against the marble floors, sobbing.
It's going to be okay. You have to be okay. For her, Arthur. Please, be okay.
His left thumb stroked over his right, and his fingers shook from the effort it took not to just die right there and then. He wanted to reply, to agree. Arthur could only sob. He and John laid there on the ground for what felt like hours, crying in near silence. No one came near them. Either no one dared, after what Hastur did to the last person who touched Arthur, or by some blessed miracle they were not discovered. At last, though, Arthur's sobs began to turn into hiccups. John had let go of his hand some time ago and was wiping the tears from his face, and exhausted, Arthur began to uncurl from the ball of misery he had contracted into.
John?
I'm here, Arthur.
What do I do?
I don't know.
Arthur took his numb left hand and pulled it to his face, pressing his knuckles against his aching eyes.
He wouldn't do that. Not to her.
We can speak more in the morning.
Something nosed against Arthur's hand, and he shuddered, curling up tighter, before the sensation of a rough tongue against his tear-soaked hand brought him into focus.
Go away, Nibbles.
The goatling made a soft bleat, and before Arthur could react, he could feel her head and neck slide through the crook of his arm, and something holding him in place, and Nibbles was carrying them back. That was good. Arthur wasn't sure he was able to walk right now. Arthur wasn't sure he wasn't willing to just lie on the floor until something opportunistic crushed him like the pathetic, spineless worm he was. He wasn't sure how Nibbles carried him without injuring him. He wasn't sure how she opened the door to his chambers and walked him to his bed. He wasn't sure how she somehow lifted him, setting him down with what almost felt like tenderness, and gently draped his blankets back over his body. He just lay there, like the corpse he so wanted to be, and prayed that morning would never come. Arthur laid in bed for 3 days. John watched, silent with the weight of grief, as the shadows on the wall emerged with dawn, danced across the walls, and disappeared with the night. He had never felt this lost. Nibbles came to visit them sometimes, emerging from the shadows or crawling incredibly ungoat-like through their window. John wasn't aware the offspring of an outer god could look apologetic, but the creature managed, ears low and sorrowful, eyes wide, head low.
This is your fault. If you hadn't come to
John
us,
had screamed at Nibbles the first time,
this would have happened. You know
screamed
how
that
dangerous it
this
is.
was her fault,
Aren't you supposed to be some kind of
that if she hadn't
protector?
come to them,
Is the world
hadn't
the only
dragged
one
them
that
out of
matters to
bed.
you? What about him?
John,
Arthur, his voice so soft and so small,
please stop.
asked him to stop. Then he rolled over in bed, and John assumed the creature disappeared. John sobbed. On the 4th day, she came.
Uncle Arthur?
Somehow, Faro had gotten inside, and when John looked over, he could see that fucking goat. It probably learned how to open doors just to piss him off. Arthur let out a surprised wheeze. The girl seemed concerned.
Nibbles said you're sick,
A frown was on her delicate little face.
but I thought you said you'd be all better by now.
Arthur blinked, exhausted, and John saw the blur of tears in his eyes.
Nibbles is very smart.
His voice was like a death rattle. John wanted to shred her to pieces, to rip and tear, and the whispers were back, and God, what if this was it?
You said you were gonna play music with me.
She said with that childish insensitivity to the pain of others. John wanted to scream, but Arthur, his investigator, his partner, his lover— wait, what? His what? His investigator, his partner, his friend. Arthur moved. Arthur sat up.
I did. Didn't I?
He struggled to his feet, shaky after days of refusing food, and Arthur got up.
What instrument should we use?
Faro squealed with delight, and John was shocked into awed silence.
Piano! Can we both play? I want to do the love parts.
Arthur nodded and sat at the piano bench, patting the seat next to him.
You all right, Fro?
She stared at him, puzzled.
Yes, Uncle.
You don't...
Arthur swallowed thickly, and John fought the urge to scream at him.
Have you had any more bad dreams?
Her voice was high, and she pressed the keys to the piano in a discordant chime.
You're silly, Uncle Arthur. Can we play now?
How? What? Tears were welling in Arthur's eyes, and John struggled to wrap his mind around what just happened.
Okay.
The sound of the vowels let John know he was smiling.
Okay, what should we play?
The song you wrote me. It's my favorite.
And once again, the barren branches of Arthur Lester began to bloom.
If you enjoyed this production of Surrogate, the Director's Cut, please read the original written work on AO3, where it is still actively updating as of January 2024. A link is in the work notes, where you can also find the social medias of all the production cast. Malevolent was written and produced by Harlan Guthrie, and all characters depicted here belong to their respective creators. The cast and management produced this show for no monetary gain, and all rights remain with the authors. Any sound effects or music used in this production were obtained legally or created by the production cast. Please let us know your thoughts, and, as Kane would say,
stay tuned for the next episode!